Speed shopper.
Hey, welcome everybody to our first Wednesday workshop on our 30-minute hot topics webinars on this week or this month is on Australian Standard AS 1851. I have the pleasure of introducing my guest today, John Lynch. John is the General Manager of Business Services at Wormald and also the Chair of the Technical Advisory Committee on Australian Standard AS 1851 within the Fire Protection Association. So, John, now that we're on air, perhaps you could give us a minute or two about yourself and what you do at Wormald and your role in the Technical Advisory Committee.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. So, morning to everyone that's attending the webinar, and I hope it's informative by the end for you. I've been in the fire industry now for 25 years on the Central Coast of New South Wales, and then I progressed to the Wormald teams, where I've been in the Wormald team for 22 years. So my background was originally portable fire extinguisher equipment, so extinguishers, fire hose reels, fire blankets, etc. And then the various roles that I was given opportunity on, I've actually progressed through to fixed systems, sprinklers, fire detection, etc., passive fire doors, etc. So I've got a well-rounded knowledge of most things that are contained in 1851 and a couple of things that aren't contained in 1851, such as exit emergency lights. The role I play here at Wormald is a mixture of all the exciting functional stuff that a large corporation has, procurement, fleet, marketing, sales, but also I'm the conduit between the Wormald organisation and industry groups such as Fire Protection Association of Australia, and in particular myself and one of my colleagues, we specialise in 1851. So like Russ, we have a liking for 1851, and we see opportunities where we could improve the current version with a new edition based on changes in technology, changes in community expectation, changes in risks that are occurring now in the built environment. So that's predominantly why I have an interest in 1851. Wormald, like Firewise, is a member of the Fire Protection Association of Australia, and one of the strengths of the association is they actually have great member engagement in regards to technical advisory committees. So these committees are generally made up very much replicating most of the sections or systems of equipment of 1851. So there's a technical advisory committee for maintenance, so predominantly 1851. And then we have a technical committee for sprinklers, fire detection, portable fire equipment, passive, emergency training, etc. So the structure is, I'm the chair of TAC1, which is the maintenance technical committee for FPA Australia, and by default, as FPA Australia is a nominating org recognised by Standards Australia, I also sit on the Standards Committee FP001, which is tasked with reviewing and looking at changes and updates to 1851 as it currently stands. So that's a little bit about me, Russ.
Thank you, John. I get to know you mostly through our role at the Fire Protection Association over the last few years, and I have to say it's been an honour to serve with you. Now, talking about FP001 and TAC1, perhaps you could just talk a little bit about what each of those acronyms mean and how they fit into the standards process.
Right. So if you think about an Australian standard, the Australian standard will talk about AS, Australian Standard 1851, which is the standard that revolves around the routine service inspections of fire systems and equipment. So how a standard is created through the Standards Australia model is they seek stakeholders to sit on the Australian standard that provides industry engagement where required regulatory engagement, so government, both federal or state, the Australian Building Codes Board possibly, and other organisations such as AFAC, which is the peak body for the emergency services in Australia. So in regards to Fire Protection Standards 001 Committee, there's a mixture of industry practitioners such as the Fire Protection Association, the National Fire Industry Association, AFAC, the Plumbers Union, the Master Plumbers. So there's a whole lot of people on there. Fire brigades are also represented on that committee. So Standards Australia and that network they put together is trying to get engagement for all key stakeholders. The chair of that actual standard FP001, Glenn Talbot, actually represents the building owners, because ultimately maintenance of fire systems and equipment costs money, and building owners are required and tasked to fund that cost. So that's how a standards committee is generated. The Technical Advisory Committee within FPA Australia, because Standards Australia recognises Fire Protection Association of Australia as a stakeholder they want on the Standards Committee, the chair of that Technical Advisory Committee, which is currently me, also sits on that. However, what we do within the Fire Protection Association Technical Advisory Committee structure is we sit in that maintenance sphere, but we also reach out to other technical committees on requirements for maintenance of sprinkler systems, or maintenance requirements on fire detection, maintenance requirements on extinguishers, hose reels. So we try and get the subject matter experts within that technical advisory structure and network within FPA Australia to provide detail and briefing for me to take as a representative of FPA Australia to the Standards Committee to work through 1851. So that's probably the best way to describe how the two are interrelated. But ultimately, I think an Australian standard on its own is a standard or possibly good practice, but where it's called up in regulation, generally at the state level, state and territory level, it becomes a mandatory requirement based on it being called up in that regulatory framework. Russ?
Thanks, John, and I appreciate that when you talk for that long, probably need a moment to catch your breath. In fact, that was a really good segue into my next question, and that is, does AS 1851 apply across the whole of the country? And I certainly know that that's a hot discussion in New South Wales at the moment.
Yeah, so not all jurisdictions actually call up 1851 as the required or minimum level of maintenance to be maintained on fire systems. So, for example, in Queensland, where there's been the fire regulations since 2008 and Ministerial Specification 6.1 has nominated 1851 as their minimum level of maintaining an essential safety system, fire systems or fire equipment. So they've had that regime in place since 2008. New South Wales, which has flagged with some major building reforms around design, certification of design of fire systems, has also flagged that by 2025 that 1851 will be mandated as the minimum standard to maintain fire systems and equipment. So in some jurisdictions it's mandatory, in other jurisdictions it hasn't been, but many customers of both Firewise and Wormald, where they're national, across all states or across all their buildings and fleets. So, such as Woolworths and Coles, for example, large players, large amount of sites all over Australia, they've always utilised 1851 ever been required and mandated, or whether it's not, as their best practice to apply to their systems equipment in their fleet of properties and supermarkets, etc. So 1851 for New South Wales is certainly taking some questions in regards to, firstly, the impacts to the building owner if their systems and equipment haven't been maintained to 1851, and certainly what cost impacts that may have. And then the industry itself in New South Wales has also, from time to time, only taken key elements from 1851 out, not the complete suite. Because if you think about the built environment, once the building is occupied and the occupancy permit, occupancy certificate is issued, 1851 is basically comes into play for the duration of the life of that building. So, if a building's got an effective life of 30, 40 years, it's 1851 for that same period of time. And then there may be triggers from time to time where refurbishments or changes to the building code may trigger some amendment to the systems equipment and possibly an amendment to the maintenance regime on it. So it's not mandated everywhere. It's pretty much very close to. New South Wales is probably still the biggest one to convert across to 1851. And then I think the majority of Australia will be following that as the minimum mandated maintenance regime.
I remember seeing a legal opinion a number of years ago, which I think is still valid today, and that is that the minimum community expectation for fire safety maintenance, irrespective of what the legislation says, is AS 1851. So I think people who don't actually follow the requirements of AS 1851 take on the risk in a court of law if something goes wrong. So I think, in summary, the minimum requirements, irrespective of what the legislation says, would be AS 1851 because it's got to satisfy the minimum community expectation test.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Russ. Sorry, Russ. I guess the other point that always gets missed is a lot of these systems and equipment we have are there to early detection, early exiting and egress from the building. But there's a group of people that actually turn up in red trucks and actually have to go back into the building. So they also have an expectation that that sprinkler system, that hydrant system, that fire detection system, that they all are capable of operating to its design intent. So it's almost like the emergency responders are the forgotten ones in this because they're going in while everyone's going out. So there's an expectation from the fire brigades that those systems must and will perform when required.
Yeah, I know a number of firefighters myself. In fact, my brother is a firefighter, and that's one of the things that they often talk about is that we're the people that go in when everything turns to poop. My next question for you, John, is what's the driver behind a change? In fact, I might explain something a little bit technical here. In standards speak, there are two phrases that we might use to describe changes to the standard. There's a new edition of the standard, and then there's an amendment to the standard. And then amendments to the standard fall into essentially two categories. The first category is technical amendments. So they're changes to the standard that are of a technical nature, perhaps not grammatical, or it might incorporate some grammatical changes, but they're technical in nature. So it might change the way we do something. And the other type of amendment to the standard is just fixing editorial changes, replacing a misspelt word or something like that. The other phrase which I suggested just before is a new edition of the standard, and a new edition is like a whole new standard, and it's not a change to an existing standard. And so I think there's been a bit of debate at the standards level. I'm not really across all of that. You might be, John. But I think there's been a bit of a debate as to whether we introduce a technical amendment or do we introduce a whole new edition of the standard. And we're going to talk about the legislative impact shortly. But if we could just jump briefly, John, what's the driver behind this?
So, Russ, that's probably a good one. So, if people are on the webinar, 1851-2012 Amendment 1. So, there's an example where 1851 was published in 2012, and based on some concerns in the community and from emergency responders and building owners, there was an amendment done. So there was a change that was triggered mainly around baseline data. I know we're going to talk about baseline data a bit further on. So there was a change required to look at correcting clauses around baseline data. So that was a trigger to that. More recently, during the middle of last year, Standards Australia actually put out to all the nominating orgs, the stakeholders that sit on FP001, about is there a need to look at a correction, whether it's technical, editorial, or a completely whole new version of 1851. And based on the feedback that came back from many of the committee members of FP001, it was decided based on that there should be a new edition. So some of the things that are triggering this is some corrections to some of the activities contained within the various sections of 1851, impacts of new technologies. When 1851-2012 was written, the utilisation of image capturing and having electronic data records wasn't so mature as it is today. So, for example, within 1851 now, it doesn't have an allowance for electronic records. It still requires for certain systems to have hard records / logbooks. So there's one example of where technology has improved significantly and the cost of that technology has dropped significantly, but the standard hasn't kept pace. So that's one of the reasons why there was a need for Standards Australia to actually seek guidance from the committee, the stakeholders and industry in regards to what should be the plan for 1851, and based on the feedback and the errors and adjustments and etc., technical corrections, Standards Australia have decided it will be a new edition.
Thanks, John. So you just touched briefly on the drivers behind this. At the Technical Advisory Committee, what's some of the feedback? And I think we've received about 700 comments so far about the current edition of the standard, so 1851-2012, Amendment number 1. Are there some common threads that we might see in feedback from people who have contributed to those questions yet?
Yeah, so some of the common feedback, and I guess the first one within section 1 of the standard was electronic record keeping as an option to be allowed, as well as hard records and other options there. Some things that sort of defy logic sometimes, or common sense. In fire detection, we do a battery condition report where we actually drain the batteries down and do a full load test. So we're actually impairing the actual fire detection system for quite a substantial amount of time, where possibly having an alternate wording in there to replace the battery. So the common industry practice generally is to replace the batteries, even though the section 3.13, the battery condition test, is really trying to push the practitioner and the maintenance company to doing load tests. So there's errors in there. There's some activities in both hydrants and sprinklers that are yearly activities that add no value. So we either take them out or push them out to a 5-yearly schedule where we do them less regularly. So the frequency changes, we still do it. So there's a mixture of making some common sense changes, looking at where there's activities that add no value that we could actually take out of the standard without impacting on the safety of the system and the operation of the system. And also where we could push frequencies out to 5 years or greater. to do it. Another example is we have a dry pendant sprinkler head, which we do on a 10-yearly frequency. We're supposed to take those away and test them. Well, basically, if there's 2 or 3 in a site, we take them out. We have to replace them with a new one. So why send them for testing? We may as well just say the time frame is reset for another 10 years because we've put brand new heads in there. So some simplistic things that would save some time, save some cost, without impacting adversely at all on the safety of the occupants and the property itself.
I know that the battery one is one close to my heart because I was involved in the development of AS 1851 2012. And I know the reason that we put those requirements in there, but the thing that drives me insane is the difference between there's a general practice of replacing batteries every 2 years, irrespective of condition, which is what the standard says. But if you understand the nuance, John, it also says for engine start batteries. And so engine start batteries are the battery that is used to drive the starter motor on an engine. And all other batteries used in fire systems are what's called standby batteries. And you don't actually have to replace those every two years, irrespective of condition. And I did a whole video about that, which is available on our on the Firewise website. And I'll just add I'll just show that down the bottom there if you want to learn more. So there's been a lot of feedback so far, and I think that the reason people might want to make changes is like what you said, John, is that there's a lot of cruft in there that's old technology, and electronic record keeping is one that I think has got to change, but it's got to change in a way that actually delivers a positive outcome for building owners. So that's a few of the things. Now, so we can just push forward. We've got 8 minutes to go. I promise people will be in and out here. Are there any other significant changes in 1851 that you can think of? For example, baseline data or new fire protection systems and equipment that are not even covered in the standard currently?
Well, and Russ, you've had a lot of experience and exposure to the exit emergency lighting standard, so you participate quite regularly on that. So we have a whole lot of essential safety measures, if you talk in regulation speak, contained in 1851, but exit emergency lights, which are called up measures in all jurisdictions in Australia, is a separate standard. So whether long term we could do that. The other one in regards to baseline data is the fact that when we take over a building post construction, a lot of the information we need to do our flow test and compare our reading actual to what was the commissioning, for example, isn't there. So one of the changes in New South Wales as part of the suite of regulatory changes was to actually develop a building manual, because if you think about it, Sprinkler Company X actually does a work for builder Y, and all that documentation goes to the certifier, and then 9 times out of 10, the occupant or the building owner, the ultimate owner, doesn't see that information. So all of a sudden, there's always a gap. So the building confidence report that was done from a national perspective, that was one of the outcomes that we're seeking the states to do, was to hold that information centrally. New South Wales is embarking on that through their planning portal. Queensland's got something in place that they're just tidying up. So, but certainly baseline data has been a challenge, as well as the cause and effects matrix linked to performing the systems interface testing. If we don't have that cause and effect matrix, all we can do literally is record what came on, what turned off, hypothetically, when we're performing that. So there's some changes we need to look at where we can get greater transparency, greater information on it. I also see that Josh has got a question on 1851 in New South Wales. So the New South Wales government, just quickly to cover Josh's question, they gave a period of 2 years to convert for a building owner to convert from a service or maintenance contract that wasn't based on 1851 to be able to convert to 1851. So they gave a transitional period of 2 years. So that's basically why they've done that, to provide time for building owners and possibly the industry, even though many of our practitioners in New South Wales are performing those inspections to 1851. So hopefully that answers your question on that one, Josh.
Thanks, John. How's your voice hanging in there?
Oh, not too bad. I haven't spoken. Well, I'm actually in Brisbane in a hotel room, so I haven't spoken to anyone. So it gets a bit croaky till I get warmed up.
I want to talk briefly about how people can get involved in the development of and provide feedback to AS 1851. So I'm going to just show a quick link now, John, to Spark. And Spark is the online forum of the Fire Protection Association, and it provides a platform for communities. And if you're a member of the Fire Protection Association, or if your employer is a member of the Fire Protection Association, you can actually join Spark, and you just probably need to talk to your employer or talk to the Fire Protection Association. But once you sign in, you've got access to essentially a forum, and I'm just having a quick scan through. I'm involved in probably 3 or 4 groups, one of which is the technical committee for AS 1851. And there's lots of backwards and forwards and questions about 1851 in there. There's a whole bunch of other groups. Each of them relate to either a technical matter or standards development. So that's my suggestion. And to access Spark, you just go to spark.fpaa.com.au. And if you're a FPA member, you'll be able to get click the sign in button and get access to Spark. So that's one of the ways you can get involved. John, are there other ways that people can get involved?
Well, ideally, if you are a member of Fire Protection Association of Australia, or even if you're a member of the NFIA, I think using their structures for seeking feedback from practitioners is a best way to do it. Because in this world of standards, when the standard comes out for public comment, to a certain degree, the horse is bolted. So really, we want to try and get that feedback very early in the piece, so we can start talking about, how do we actually perform the flow test on a hydrogen system? What are the things we should be looking at? And 9 times out of 10, the most valuable feedback is from the person or the practitioner doing that particular work, because they're the ones doing it every day. They're the ones that can spot an obvious omission or an obvious thing we just don't do because it's impossible to do. So I think if you can utilise, if you're a member of either of the associations, use their feedback channel, and Spark's a great tool for the Fire Protection Association. That's the best way to do it. But certainly when a standard comes out, there is a public comment period of time when the draft is issued for public comment, and then that submission date shuts, and then the committee reconvenes and goes through all the public comment and takes feedback where required. But certainly doing it early in the piece through your industry associations is probably the best way to be heard and seen, and the feedback's factored in.
Just on that feedback subject, where the standard is referenced in legislation, there may also be a need for a regulatory impact statement. And generally speaking, a regulatory impact statement is making sure that there is a net community benefit from the change. So it would be very easy for us as contractors to go, right, we want to do all these things because it's good for our businesses. But if it doesn't stack up and it doesn't satisfy the net community benefit test, it will never make it through legislation. And that was one of the big barriers to AS 1851 2012. It came as a bit of a surprise to legislators. I don't think we did a particularly good job of communicating that. And that's something that we as a community will be working towards fixing into the future, so that when we do get to the point where we've got a new standard published, that either there's parallel legislation happening at the same time, or very nearby, so that we don't end up with 2 or 3 editions of the standard that all could be applicable. So we're almost out of time, John. I'm very grateful for your support and time today. We have webinars happening every month throughout 2023. Our next webinar is on electric vehicles in buildings, and John and I talked about it, and the hashtag for this is hot topics, and he said that's a hot topic. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about portable fire extinguishers and electric vehicles. I've got a really strong opinion about it, which I'm looking forward to share, but I've also got lined up a really good guest speaker about thermal runaway in electric vehicles. And that's only one of the potential risks, but I'm not going to spill my guts on that today. So, John, if people wanted to reach out to you and connect with you and Wormald, what's the best place they could reach you? Oi, we've lost him. We've lost John for a minute, so we'll just swap back to me.
So my email
here we go.
address,
He's
Russ,
back.
if you
He's
need
back.
to get feedback. Yep.
There you go, John, you're back. You're back, John. You can tell the viewers where's the best place they can connect with you and your organisation. No, we've lost John again. The best way to probably look up John is via his LinkedIn page, and it's LinkedIn, and you just search for John Lynch at Wormald. And he is also the chair of Technical Advisory Committee 1. So again, I'm very grateful for John's time today. He's a very knowledgeable person when it comes to AS 1851 and has a very good broad knowledge about fire protection and fire protection maintenance in Australia. So thanks for joining us today. Very grateful for your questions. And by all means, just put more questions in the chat and we can always answer those at a later stage. So once again, thank you, John, for your time, and thanks for watching.